Welcome to Module 1, Lesson 1. Human factors, what are they? Human factors is a scientific discipline. The formal definition comes from the International Ergonomics Association, the body responsible for this. And they say the scientific discipline concerned with the understanding of interactions amongst humans and other elements of a system, and the profession that applies theory, principles, data and methods to design in order to optimize human well-being and overall system performance. Wow. What a mouthful. A much simpler definition is making it easy to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. Now the thing might be decision making, it might be communications or teamwork, or if we look at diving equipment, it might be about using a rebreather controller, a dive computer, a BCD or a reel. Or if we're looking at dive instruction, it might be about the layout and construction of teaching materials or learning psychology. An analogy I often use is Homer Simpson and his role as a nuclear power plant supervisor. Here we have Homer sitting at his control panel. The panel's pretty complicated. There's lots of dials, knobs, buttons and displays, and it takes quite a lot of training to make sense of that information, and you have to be alert to what might happen. That alertedness is based on our ability to concentrate and at the same time notice something that isn't quite right in a sea of normal information. This part of human factors related to humans interacting with hardware based on our physical and our psychological limitations. Here's hoping Homer can cope. Homer also has to deal with his own physiology, hunger and thirst primarily. To do this, he drinks coffee and loves donuts. The problem with coffee and donuts are the associated sugar and caffeine rushes. While they might get the job done in the short term, as the effects wear off, then Homer's attention drops. But that's okay, because every hour he's got a coffee and a donut. Finally, Homer has to deal with organizational pressures. He works in a nuclear power station which must keep the lights on in Springfield. Otherwise, the residents get angry and they won't pay their bills, which makes Mr. Burns unhappy. So all the time Homer is working, he's got an imaginary Mr. Burns sitting on his shoulder going, keep the power on, keep the power on. There's a lot of pressure there. Now on this particular day, Homer misses some important information during the morning brief because it was rushed as Mr. Burns and his sidekick were running late, and there wasn't really an opportunity to ask questions. Besides, the last time Homer asked a stupid question, everybody laughed at him, so now he doesn't want to ask those questions. Now, Homer's halfway through his day. He had lunch about an hour ago, so he's got into that post-lunch slump. But his coffee and donut break are coming up in 5 minutes, so it'll all be okay. And all of a sudden, lights and warning horns start blaring. And he can't make sense of the situation because he's startled. And the displays and controls weren't designed for him, they were made for an expert. And as he's trying to work out what he's doing, he's afraid to make the wrong decision because he knows he'll be in trouble. Mr. Burns doesn't tolerate errors. He's also got that imaginary Mr. Burns sitting on his shoulder going, keep the power on, keep the power on. If you don't, you're fired. Eventually, through trial and error, Homer manages to resolve the situation and get the power restored. And it certainly wasn't down to the checklist he had to follow. The good thing is that no one noticed what had happened. There was a blip in the power output, but he can explain that away easily with the term human error, and it'll all be forgotten about. Besides, it was only a minor mistake, and nobody got hurt. Although, he does remember something similar like that happening last year. I wonder why it didn't get fixed then. Oh, that's right. He didn't report it because nothing ever gets fixed. And besides, there isn't a way of reporting these things. Now, I know this might sound familiar for Homer and those who watch The Simpsons, but how familiar does it sound when it comes to diving? We've got time pressures. We've got money pressures. We've got hungry and we're thirsty. We've got peer pressures. We've got poorly designed equipment, we've got inadequate instruction, we have poor dive briefs, limited incident reporting and feedback mechanisms. The checklists aren't as good as they could be, and we have a lack of psychological safety. If you look at the diving incident reports or the stories that are told on forums and social media, you'll notice that in many cases it wasn't about an undetectable fault with the equipment. It was more likely to be how the diver interacted with their diving equipment, including the computer, the controller, the group they were diving with and or their instructor, the training they'd had in the past, the decisions they made or the miscommunications that had occurred. These interactions are what human factors in diving is about, making it easy to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. However, before I move on to the rest of the module, I'd like to highlight that human factors is not just about the factors of the human. And even more importantly, it's not another term for human error. It is about how we as humans interact the system with which we're part of. In diving, this relates to the underwater and the surface environments, the social and cultural aspects of diving, the diving equipment we operate, the training manuals, guides and instructions we use, and most importantly, how we perform and how we reflect on that performance. Now, the next section is about non-technical skills, which are a subset of human factors, and how they relate to creating a shared expectation of what is going to happen in the future with our dive team and the dive they're about to do. So please stay tuned.